Here we are. It is a Tuesday edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull. Tuesday, December 27th. Down the stretch we come of 2022. And coming up on today's show, we're going to get into the Cavaliers and their latest loss, 2 losses in a row. They fall to the Brooklyn Nets. Big run at the end of the first half kind of sealed their fate, and they could not come back against the Nets. We'll talk about that. Also, news breaking yesterday that Myles Garrett didn't play in the first series against the Saints. What happened there? We'll get into it. The news kind of broke after we did the podcast yesterday. So we'll get into that and a whole lot more on this Tuesday Bullpen with Adam the Bull.
Podcast is not for the faint of heart.
And I do think it's time for the Browns to move on.
It's not for those who ride the fence.
He's proven nothing.
But if you're looking for someone who tells it like it is about Cleveland sports,
everybody does fandom their way.
You've come to the right place.
I don't think he's any good.
It's time for the Bullpen with Adam the Bull.
And here we are, everybody. Today's episode of The Bullpen with Adam the Bull is, of course, brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. And we start with the Cleveland Browns yesterday. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize Myles Garrett hadn't played on that first series. Somehow, I don't think the announcer said anything. I apologize. I was lost in the soup on that. And Myles Garrett did not play, and we find out yesterday it's due to disciplinary reasons that Myles Garrett was held out on the first drive against New Orleans while the always exciting Chase Winovich filled in for him. So Myles Garrett missed practice last week due to an illness. Mary Kay Cabot is reporting that apparently there was some miscommunication here where maybe Myles Garrett didn't do a good enough job communicating with the team about his status. There's other things kind of floating out in the ether about other things going on, but it's disappointing to see. What I don't understand is, listen, there's plenty of things to criticize Kevin Stefanski about for this year, and I don't know exactly what happened here. Maybe Myles Garrett will speak about it. Maybe he won't. Maybe it was a simple miscommunication mistake. Maybe he's frustrated with how the season's going. Maybe he's frustrated that he's had virtually no help on the defensive line for a few years. But, and again, as I talked about yesterday when I did the podcast about, lots of blame to go around, nobody immune from blame, including Kevin Stefanski, who I've defended. There's plenty of blame on his shoulders. However, a lot of the complaints about Kevin Stefanski this year have been nobody's held accountable, right? Led by Joe Woods. Joe Woods is not accountable. Mike Prefer, these guys have done a bad job. They still have a job. Players not held accountable. It's too easy for guys. Well, to some degree, a star player was held accountable. Myles Garrett did something the team didn't like, that Kevin Stefanski didn't like, and there was accountability for it. Now, was it enough? I don't know. But what I don't understand, because I don't know exactly what happened, but what I don't understand is why are people getting mad at Kevin Stefanski because of this? You see, I think there's got to be, too often in sports, there's coddling, there's favoritism. I've never liked that. I always thought a good boss treats everybody the same. And, well, not necessarily treats everybody the same, because as a boss, you have to know how to communicate to the people you work with, right? I haven't been a boss very often, but I have been a boss at times for a small staff in my life, and you get to know the people that work for you, and you got to handle people differently. Some people can deal with tough love, and they need that a little more. Some people you got to have a softer hand with. But ultimately, a penalty for or a consequence for something that's done should be equal, assuming it's a first offense or whatever. Obviously, there's different levels, and there's different offenses. But if a guy is going to get punished for miscommunication, missing a practice, let's say, and it's a first time for guy A, who's a superstar, and a first time for guy B, who's the 53rd man on the roster, To me, the penalty should be the same. Special treatment for special players happens. It shouldn't. It's become the norm. I think probably most coaches do it. Maybe if I were a coach and I didn't do it, maybe I'd be out of a job because none of the superstars would want to play for me. But I believe in treating people fairly, contrary to popular belief. I do. And I think if I'm going to, if Myles Garrett did something worth a consequence, which he probably did. I don't think Kevin Stefanski just would do this for no reason. That doesn't make any sense. So I don't have any problem with it. And I don't know why anybody would get mad at Kevin for the idea that, well, Myles Garrett's one of your only good players. Well, okay, but if one of your only good players is doing something that has a negative effect on the team, no matter how many good things he's done, no matter what kind of positive effect he has on the field, no matter how frustrated he may be by the circumstances around him, it doesn't matter. It's not an excuse for saying, bleep it, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. And I'm not saying that necessarily happened here, but I think everybody should have to follow the same rules. In our society, it doesn't work that way, but that's how it should. People that have money can get away with things that people that don't have money can't. That's not fair. And you can say, well, life's not fair. Okay. But as a person, if I have a decision-making job, if I'm in charge of people, I'm going to do my best to treat them fairly, equally. And I think if everybody did that, the world would be a better place. Unfortunately, that never happens. Nepotism, cronyism, classism, sexism, racism, all these isms play a role in all decisions in life. And that's an unfortunate thing. But that's what happens. But I think it's absurd for anybody to be criticizing Kevin Stefanski for this, because there are plenty of legit things to be critical of Kevin Stefanski for during this 2022 season. But if you've been one of these people that all season long have criticized Kevin Stefanski for having no accountability, well, then you're a hypocrite if you're complaining that he suspends Myles Garrett, because he's now holding a star player accountable. Now, I know some people are going to argue, and we'll see on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show today, we'll talk about this a little bit. Some people would argue, well, Joe Woods hasn't been good all year. Where's the accountability there? Well, there's a difference between us thinking he hasn't done his job well. I think it's pretty safe to say. And somebody purposely violating rules to the detriment of the team. I think that's a different story. Now, do I think Joe Woods should have been fired? Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a million times, and we can make that argument. But that's a separate thing from what happened here with Myles Garrett. We can't complain all year that there's no accountability and then be upset when somebody's held to be accountable. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I'm a big Myles Garrett fan. Everybody that knows me knows this. He's one of my favorite players on the team. Other people have been critical of him, and at times he could be more productive. And I think even he would admit there is one final level that his game could get to. Right? He is an excellent player, but he's not Aaron Donald. He's not Reggie White. He's not the all-time of the all-time greats. There's one more level he could reach that he hasn't reached yet. I think he would admit that. But part of the reason he hasn't reached that final level is because he's had nothing around him. He has no help. You look at some of these other teams that have these great pass rushers, great defensive linemen, like T.J. Watt, the Bosa brothers. These guys have other guys around them, especially Watt and Bosa on the Niners. I forget which one is on the Niners. Isn't that Nick? I can't remember. Yeah, and other teams have depth. You look at the depth of the defensive line. That's sometimes more important. Like the Bengals don't have one star defensive lineman, but they have two borderline stars in DJ Reader and Trey Hendrickson, and then BJ Hill and Sam Hubbard are really good. I'd rather have 4 tier 2 and 3 defensive linemen than 1 tier 1 and a bunch of tier 5s. It's the same thing on the offensive line. And that depth is important. Myles Garrett has had virtually no help. I mean, he's had Jadeveon Clowney on the other side the last parts of the last 2 years. Clowney's not a big-time pass rusher. He's a good player overall, but not great. He has no help in the middle. The Browns have never had particularly good defensive tackles in his entire time here. And at this point, the last 2 years, and especially this year, it's worse than it's ever been. The Browns have no... Now, they have some young players who could become starters, but at this point, they have no starting caliber players at their defensive tackle. None. Zero. None of these guys are any good, at least now. Again, could Perrion Winfrey or some of these other guys eventually be good? Yeah, Perrion Winfrey especially is a rookie, and so time will tell. But as of now, none of those guys are starting caliber, and that creates frustration. It creates frustration for everybody. But the bottom line is you got to do your job. Myles Garrett has done his job as best he could. He's got a bunch of sacks. He's got some pressures. He gets double-teamed and held and all this stuff. Not that he's this idea that he's the only defensive lineman getting held is silly, or he's the only one getting double-teamed. But he gets double-teamed more than any other defensive lineman, more than any other, because all the other good defensive linemen have better talent around them. It's been the case basically his entire career. And eventually that piles up and leads to frustration. And I get it. But Myles Garrett has to use that frustration in the right way, and for the most part in his career, he has. In this case, he did something he shouldn't have done. It's probably not the end of the world. If it was a big deal, it would have been more of a consequence than missing one series, but it had to be at least fairly egregious if Kevin Stefanski was going to sit him for a series in a game that held the slim Browns playoff hopes. And had the Browns won that game, and the Saints didn't score in that first drive, so it ultimately didn't matter. But had the Browns won that game, they'd still be alive for the playoffs right now because the Dolphins lost. And that path would be somewhat open. Obviously they'd be behind the Patriots and the Jets and all these other teams, but it'd be open because the Dolphins are now 8-7, and Tua is in concussion protocol, and that last spot will probably go to a team that's 9-8, honestly. And it could have been the Browns, but, now that ship has sailed. So, clearly there's a lot of frustration with a lot of different players on this defense. And I'll be curious to see what kind of effort this team has the last couple of weeks. And will anybody be shut down? Obviously, Myles Garrett, after getting into that car accident, where, again, he was very irresponsible. We talk about it, and we can't just heap the praise on Myles Garrett. He did something here to get himself, suspended or left out of the first series. He was irresponsible off the field, the way he was driving, that led to the car accident where he could have killed himself. He could have killed somebody else. And it led to an injury that has affected him, obviously. Now, will they shut him down? Now, I give him credit. He's played through it. But he put himself in that position, and he put himself again in this position to get suspended. But you'd like to see him finish out the season. I don't know what the Browns are going to do. Been a huge disappointing season for the Browns defense. There's no way around it. They do need a change at the top there at DC. But who will we blame next year if the defense doesn't work? It's a frustrating thing. But in the end, I don't think the Browns have as far to go as it may seem right now. We're in the middle of it. We're in the thick of it. Other teams have passed the Browns by. These things change year by year. In the last couple of weeks, Baker's played well 2 out of 3 games. The Steelers have gotten a little hot here at the end. They're not going to make the playoffs, most likely, but they've passed the Browns in the standings. And if the Browns lose to them in the last game of the season, they'll finish behind the Browns. Browns will finish in last place again. We've seen, obviously, the Bengals go from bottom of the barrel to the top of the division. So it's very frustrating if you're a Browns fan. I get it. If you're a Browns player, if you're one of the good players on this team, you're frustrated. But you can't let that overcome. I mean, I want to see this team. Now, again, whether the Browns play well in these last 2 games or not, to me, I don't know that it means that much next year. But what it could signal is what this team thinks of Kevin Stefanski, and are they going to play hard for their coach? Because if the Browns crater and finish 6-11, lose their last 2 games, it's possible Kevin Stefanski might get fired even if they win the last 2 games. You never know. We are all assuming that Kevin Stefanski's not going to be fired, but only person that knows that for sure is Jimmy Haslam. But how these players play, what they do in these last 2 games, could go a long way to determining that, and their signal of faith, level of faith in their head coach. We haven't heard about him losing the locker room. We have heard rumblings about Joe Woods losing the defense. Has Kevin Stefanski lost the locker room? I'd love to know what the other players think about Myles Garrett's situation. Are they on his side because it's all players? Or are there players frustrated with Myles Garrett that wouldn't say it because he's as a captain, he needs to have better judgment. And that's disappointing. It's easy to just say Kevin Stefanski's the bad guy because we know Myles Garrett has been great. And we all love Myles Garrett, and we still love Myles Garrett. But he's made some bad decisions this year. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing life-changing, nothing that makes him a bad guy. But he's made some bad choices. We all do it. But his are more in the spotlight. All right, take a break. We'll switch it up to the Cavs, who dropped their second straight, losing to the Nets last night at home. Cavs had 2 losses. Well, we'll get to that. That's coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about Bet Online. It's your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, back in a sec. Camera off here for a second. There we go. I'm still here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull. All right. Let's get a drink in here. Here we go. So, the Cavaliers last night, not great. There was one great thing, is Darius Garland had a hell of a performance. But it was not enough. Cavs dropped their second straight, falling to the Nets 125-117. What's particularly alarming about their last 2 losses to Toronto and to Brooklyn, and we know Brooklyn's playing great. They've won 9 in a row. And it was the first time the Cavs had played the Nets this year. And obviously, this Nets team, they have a ton of talent with their 2 stars, Durant and Kyrie. Both played well. Both played yesterday and both played well. But what's concerning about the Cavs in these last 2 home games, remember they'd been 16-2 at home before losing to Toronto on Friday and the Nets last night. In those 2 games, they gave up 242 points. So that's 121 per game. That is bad. Their defense has disappeared the last couple of games. The positive, of course, Darius Garland was 14 of 20 from the field, 13 of 15 from the line, 5 of 7 of 3. I mean, he was just outstanding. He had 46 points and 8 assists, 3 rebounds, only 1 turnover. He played a magnificent game. Unfortunately, he didn't get much help. Donovan Mitchell, you don't see this very often. 2 games in a row, he has struggled. 5 of 16 from the field, had 14 against Toronto and only 15 last night. Jarrett Allen didn't shoot the ball much. He did have a double-double, 10 and 11, but, Mobley had 12 points and Jetty had 11. It's just nobody else was really outstanding. They didn't shot. I mean, the Cavs, even with Donovan Mitchell going 5 of 16, the Cavs shot it pretty well overall, but the defense just horrible. The Nets were 57% from the field and 60% from 3, 18 of 30 from 3, led by Durant and Kyrie, who combined to go 12 of 19, almost 70% from 3. The Cavs also, lost a battle on the glass. The Nets were just a better team last night. And the Cavs got that nice win over Milwaukee, and now they've, taken some lumps here against Toronto and Brooklyn, and we know what Brooklyn could do. Kyrie and Durant had 32 points each. TJ Warren shot it really well off the bench. He had 23. you know, so it was an interesting game. The Cavs, played better offensively in the second half after they only scored 49 at halftime. They did score 68 in the second half, but it wasn't enough. They only outscored the Nets by 8 after the Cavs were down 1 with a few minutes to go in the first half, and then the Nets went on that big run, and Kyrie hit a bunch of threes, and what are you going to do? But this is, these are the battles you're going to have. But like I said, the Cavs, the disappointing part is the defense. That's supposed to be there every day, especially on the at home. I know you're playing an athletic team in Toronto, a long team, and the Nets, obviously have the 2 stars, but you expect a better effort defensively. It just wasn't there. I saw some people debating Evan Mobley. I think we got to remember that Evan Mobley is just 21 years old. To this point, we were hoping he'd take a big jump from year 1 to year 2. He hasn't. But, and I think it's fair to say that. It does seem like people get very uncomfortable if you talk about the fact that, he hasn't made a huge jump from year 1 to year 2. Now, part of that is he's shooting the ball. He's actually shooting the ball better this year, 56% to 51%. He's shooting the 3 worse. Not that he's taking a lot of threes. He's taking about 1 a game. Free throw percentage up a little bit. Rebounds up a little bit. So if you look at the overall numbers, I mean, his numbers are a little better. He's scoring a little bit less, half point less per game. But as I said, he's taking 1.5 shots less per game. So I get it that we were expecting this big jump, but, it takes time. He's still a really young player. So I think it's fair to say there's been no jump from year 1 to year 2, at least not a significant one. And also say, wait a second, that makes sense. He's a very young player at 21 years old, learning his way with some other really good players. I think if Evan Mobley was playing on a crappy team where he was the only, if they didn't have, it wouldn't be any good. But if he was playing without, let's say they just had Darius Garland and they had no Allen and no Mitchell. Well, yeah, he'd be scoring more points. He'd be taking more shots, but the Cavs wouldn't be good just having 2 good young players. Instead, they have 4, and, he's the 3rd or 4th option at this point, which is understandable. And he's learning his way, and he's got to get more comfortable on the court and finding his moments. And you'd like to see him be a little more aggressive at times, especially on the defensive end. His block shots are down about a half a block per game. But I think I'm not worried long term, and I think it is fair to say, okay, yeah, I'd like to see him take more than 3 free throws in a game, and take it. But Darius Garland's jump came in year 3. If these guys all play together another few years, he'll get more used to playing with all these guys. Everybody's kind of adjusting to Donovan Mitchell being here. I think it's been a great adjustment so far. But there's still going to be growing pains. And Evan Mobley's never going to be the first option, or at least for the foreseeable future is not going to be the first option. So he's got to find his way to dominate defensively and find his space, his part of the offense. And that's tricky when you're playing on a good team because the Cavs are playing to win. If he were on a bad team, the number one goal would be for him to develop. And certainly his development is an important goal for the Cavs. But the most important thing is the Cavs winning and the Cavs making a run in the playoffs. And so he's got to develop within that. And I think he's doing fine. It's just hasn't made as big a jump as maybe we thought he would have. And maybe it was unfair to expect a huge jump in year 2 when they just added Donovan Mitchell and he's 21 years old. We'll see. I think we all believe that jump is coming. But maybe it won't come till year 3 or year 4. Or maybe it's going to be a slower trend where he just gets a little better each year. And I think his overall game, I think he is a little better this year. It's just you don't see it as much on the offensive end because he's taking less shots. And when you add a Donovan Mitchell, yeah, that's going to make sense. Last year, and again, we're only at the halfway point or not even at the halfway point of the season. We're getting close to it. Last year, Evan Mobley took 12 shots a game. This year, he's taking 10.5 shots a game. And he's making about the same. He made 6.1 per game last year, 5.9 this year. So he's basically making the same as last year's 6 shots per game, but this year he's doing it on 10.5 shots as opposed to 12. So there's definite improvements. Free throw line, he's gotten over 70% this year, which is good. As I mentioned, the rebounding's up, the assists up a little bit. Turnovers are about the same. He's getting a little more foul trouble. Last year he averaged about 2 fouls per game. This year he's up to about 3. And that, can affect him as well, although his minutes are about the same, even slightly up at this point. But I'm not worried about anything long-term, but I also think it is fair to I don't think people should get mad when somebody like me or somebody else says, well, there hasn't been a big jump in year 2. I mean, it's pretty obvious. There hasn't been. Doesn't mean that I or anybody else is saying that it won't happen eventually, whether it continues to be a slow build or he eventually takes a jump next year or the year after. I don't think anybody's down on Evan Mobley in the long term. All right, take a quick break, then some final thoughts to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the Bullpen. Coming up next, right here with Adam the Bull. All right. Just watched season 3 of Jack Ryan during the holiday weekend. That's a show on Amazon based on a series of books. Guy's a CIA agent. If you're a fan of the book series, if you've watched the first 2 seasons of the TV series, season 3 was good. It's always a little silly and not very realistic, but it's TV. Who cares? Overall, I enjoyed season 3. I like the main actors in it, including this guy who played like the Russian version of the CIA. The actor was in Braveheart. He played the father of the big redheaded guy. I can't think of the actor's name or the character's name on Braveheart, but if you know what I'm talking about, that guy, I like that guy. And anyway, so check it out. If you haven't watched the show at all, it's fun. It's a thriller. It's a spy drama. Again, it's a little silly, but it's enjoyable. I'm not saying it's Breaking Bad or anything, but it's a fun show to watch. Another show that I've been enjoying, the final episode I think comes out today. It's a mini series on FX on Hulu called Fleischman is in Trouble. It stars, again, I can't think of the actor's name, the guy who played the Facebook founder in the Facebook movie. Can't think of this freaking guy's name. And then Claire Danes is in it as well. And I don't know. It's good. It's a good show. It's kind of had some interesting twists to it. It's a little depressing, but good nonetheless. This time of the year is tricky. There's not a lot of shows starting around now. I am enjoying, again, the show is a little cheesy. But I am enjoying Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone. I think there's 1 or 2 episodes left of that one on Paramount Plus. Coming up after the new year, season 3 of Godfather of Harlem comes back. Season 2 of I can't think of that show on Paramount Plus with Jeremy Renner. He's in a small town. He's a cop, or he's not a cop. He's like a fix-it guy. I can't think of the name of the show. Anyway, that's coming back. There's a bunch of things coming in January, but the holiday season's always a little dicey when it comes to television. Finally, Chargers punched their ticket to the playoffs yesterday, beating the embarrassing Jeff Saturday and the Colts, who lost every game since his initial win. 20-3 is the final. Chargers 9-6. So 5 of the 7 spots in the AFC have been locked up. Or is it 4? No, it's 5. Bills, Chiefs, Bengals, Ravens, and Chargers are in. Those teams will likely be the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs are one. Although the Ravens could still win the North. If the Ravens win out, they win the North. They do control their destiny. Even if the Bengals beat the Bills on Monday, if the Ravens win out, they'd be 12-5, and they would have beaten the Bengals the last game of the season. Both teams would be 12-5. The Ravens would win the division. So that and because the Bengals are playing the Bills, that's certainly up for grabs still. The 4 seed's going to either be Jacksonville or Tennessee. Both teams are 7-8. They play each other the final week. Whoever wins that game wins the division, no matter what happens next week. So we know one of those teams will be in the playoffs. The 7th spot right now is Miami. at 8-7, but they're in trouble. They're not playing well. Tua is now potentially going to miss a game against New England. The Patriots, who have looked awful, control their destiny because they play the Dolphins this week. And then you have the Jets at 7-8, the Titans at 7-8, still alive for both the division and the wild card. And even the Steelers at 7-8 and the Raiders at 6-9 are still alive. But obviously, both those teams are big-time long shots. That's going to do it for the Tuesday bullpen. I'll talk to you on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show today. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, which you'll get alerts. If you click that alert bell, we need to get you in there. Want to get to 19,000 before the end of the year, about 125 people away with a few days to go, so help us get there. You'll get alerts whenever I do a podcast, whenever the show puts out a podcast, post-game shows, and more. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Where else but right here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull. See ya.